Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to try something a little new today. We're going to talk about the history of China and how communism has influenced its history. At the end of this video, you should be able to answer the following questions. Why was China isolated from the world? Why were they so far behind the rest of the world developmentally? What were the ideas of the two groups that fought in the Chinese Civil War? What effects did communism have on China, and how is China's economy today? Before we get started, as you remember from our ancient China unit, China was separated from the rest of the world by physical barriers. These barriers, primarily the Taklamakan Desert, which was nicknamed the Sea of Death. They talked about the poisonous snakes there, the deadly heat during the day, and the freezing cold at night. It made it very difficult, along with the Gobi Desert and the Himalaya Mountains, which you can see in the bottom right here, made it very difficult for outsiders to approach the country. They were also isolated. They had a series of rulers or emperors. These emperors believed that they had enough natural resources to sustain themselves or survive. They didn't think they had to trade. Because of this, they simply did not trade. They kept themselves isolated or separated from the outside world also because they thought their own culture was the best culture in the world. These emperors did not want Chinese culture being meshed or mixed up with European, or as we like to call it, Western culture. So here's what's going on at this time around the world. Throughout the early to mid 1800s, especially into the late 1800s, superpowers like the United States and Great Britain, they were industrializing. People were making a lot of money by starting factories that produced automobiles, as you see in the bottom left there. Railroad tracks were built so textiles or other items could be sent or shipped to be traded. Along with these types of transportation means that were produced by the Industrial Revolution, a lot of household items, better homes were made, also weapons were made. These weapons included a lot of guns that have influenced modern day guns and weapons. With these weapons, these superpowers like the United States and Great Britain, they were able to go to other parts of the country, as you will see shortly, and kind of force their will on countries that had not developed to the point that they had. China's isolation or unwillingness to trade kept them behind. They were not experiencing any of that industrial boom, so to speak, like the United States had. They didn't have automobiles. They did not have the trains to ship their goods. They did not have advanced machinery. As you can see in the bottom right, this is more of a modern day picture, but they were an agricultural society. Their society still resembled the societies we studied in ancient civilizations that relied heavily on farming. Almost all Chinese during the 1800s were farmers, and that's just how it was. They were okay. They were able to do that and survive, but once they met up with the superpowers that, well, were more advanced, they were unable to put them down, so to speak. So here's how this all went down. The Europeans were able to bust into China. For years, the Europeans tried to trade with China. There's this road that developed that we'll talk about later in our economic unit called the Silk Road. These Europeans, they wanted this silk. Because China did not want any outside influences in their country, they refused to trade their silk for some time to the Europeans. Eventually, they wanted to trade, but the Chinese would only accept silver for their trade. The Europeans didn't have a lot of silver. They had goods they wanted to trade. This led to a series of conflicts called the Opium War. Opium is actually a drug that was very addicting at the time. Rather than trading with silver, the Europeans would bring this opium over. Many, many, many millions of Chinese citizens got addicted to this drug. Because of this addiction that they had, they continued to trade, and there was kind of a black market or under the table trade that went on. The Europeans were able to trade in this way. The Chinese were unhappy. This led to a war that was called the Opium War. Because of their advanced weapons, the Europeans, Great Britain, actually was able to win this Opium War, and they controlled part of China. Because China has a very rich history, and they were the Chinese are very proud people, they were unhappy that these Western powers, or these advanced people that many of them had never seen before, now ruled and controlled parts of their country. This brought about the end of the series of dynasties. When we started studying ancient China, we talked about the Han Dynasty, the Qin Dynasty, all of these different dynasties that built the Great Wall. They forced back the Mongols. These dynasties had been ruling for thousands of years. They ruled, they were a monarchy. If you remember, those emperors they believed were chosen by God. They lived in that really nice city, the Forbidden City. This was over. As foreigners barged into China and wanted to trade, as they were able to do that, many Chinese were upset and they overthrew this system of emperors. So the new China. China is no longer ruled by emperors. They're a democracy. Yay, that sounds excellent. We're a democracy. However, that did not last long, unfortunately. Some people were very upset, primarily the farmers, about their poor living standards. This kind of gave way to this idea that we've been talking about in class, the idea of communism. So remember our buddy Joseph Stalin that we talked about. He ruled the USSR, the Soviet Union. He did so by force and intimidation. They owned all means of production. People in China started to see that. They saw the promises that Joseph Stalin made to his people that no one would be poor, and they kind of liked that idea. So we have two existing ideologies here. On the right side, hopefully you remember from your e-learning that Karl Marx was the founder of communism. Communism sounds like such a nice idea in theory, but it never works out that way. Within a communist government, they believe people should work together to improve the nation and have equal share of the nation's wealth. It sounds like a nice idea. Everyone will share everything. Well, everyone will work hard, we'll divide up the riches, and everyone will have something. There will be no poor. The government controls and plans the economy. People don't get to decide what to make. They are told what they should make. The left side here, this is the system of rule that China was under, capitalism. It's very much like the system we have. People can make what they want, they can buy what they want, they can sell what they want, and the government has very little influence. So these two competing ideologies, these differing schools of thought, they really came to a head, and these were the faces of these two parties. So on the left, the capitalists, the people that supported democracy, they were called nationalists, and their leaders, you can see in the bottom left, was a gentleman by the name of Chiang Kai-shek. On the right side, because you've done the web quest, kind of spoils the ending, you know who wins. The leader of the communists was Mao Zedong, or more commonly referred to as just Mao. So there was a civil war, about 22 years of conflict. If you focus on the map on the right side, I wish I could point on this thing, but I don't think I can. You see that there are arrows that go throughout the country of China. What's happening here is during this war, the communists, they start in northern China and they kind of make their way through western China. These are agricultural areas where there are a lot of farmers. These communists are going through these areas and they're recruiting poor farmers. They're saying, hey, come join us. You will never be poor again. You will always have enough food to eat. You always have a roof over your head. We will take care of you. To these poor farmers that are living in abject poverty, not necessarily knowing where their next meal is going to come from, they were thrilled by this idea. So of course, like many of you who responded to the prompt on My Big Campus saying, this idea of communism sounds great. These people did the same thing and they joined to help fight with the communists. 22 bloody years later, the communists were victorious. The result of this war, as much so as any war in the history of anywhere, negatively had an impact on China's history. So the communists established, you can see on the right side, the People's Republic of China. They redistributed land, so basically no one owned land anymore. The government owns everything. The government set up a series of plans or targets for people to meet. They were sent to farms, they were forced to work, they were given goals to the government that they had to fulfill. So it's called the Great Leap Forward. Basically what that means, it was an attempt to rapidly industrialize and improve food production. Hunger and famine had been a giant problem throughout China's history, so that's the first thing that they focused on. People could no longer own their own homes, own their own lands, or own their own products to buy and sell. So 700 million people were organized by the government, and they were sent to 27,000 different communes or communities in which they were forced to live and work. There were 600,000 backyard iron steel furnaces that were set up in villages. They were made without a lot of education, and these things really did not see a lot of success. So could this possibly work? The reason that people in America are so good at their jobs, or for the most part are so good at their jobs, is because we pursue and do things that we like to do. I consider myself to be a decent teacher, and the reason is because I wanted to go into teaching. Because of that, I went to college, I was properly educated in that field, and I pursued something that I really enjoyed doing. However, because these people were told they had to, they were forced to work, without the proper education and the desire to work in these fields, they did not attain the necessary skills to produce what the government wanted. That'd be like saying, hey, Mr. Branning, you're going to be a brain surgeon. You're going to go perform brain surgery in 2 hours. Show of hands right now, how many people would want Mr. Branning, as much as I trust him, operating on your brain? Okay, yeah, I'm looking around. I don't see any hands. Yeah, me either. Me either. So, as a summary, people don't choose their jobs. People can't speak out against the government. Very similar to the Soviet Union. People that would oppose this system, they'd end up missing. The government became an unlimited government. One of the greatest examples of this is the one-child policy. The government was involved in people's lives, even to the extent that they could determine how many children a couple would have. Because of overpopulation and overcrowding, a lot of people in China were only allowed to just have one child. So that's an extreme example of absolute government control. So the aftermath of all of this, looking back, 20 million people died of starvation and related diseases. This system that was supposed to feed people, the system that was supposed to treat people, it didn't work. People were dying of diseases. People did not have enough medical training to deal with sick people. They didn't have the, what am I trying to say? They didn't have the expertise to come up with food in the best way that would feed a bunch of people. So it was said that this economic disaster was 30% the fault of nature and 70% human error. The human error being referred to here is that of communism. So only in the last 20 years has China made efforts to trade and end communism. Today, China is one of the largest economies in the country. They're getting rid of these communist ideas. They're not completely gone. China is still considered a partially communist country. But as you can see here, this graph illustrates the average annual income that people had in US dollars in 1980 is about equivalent to 250 US dollars. Today it's up around 3,500. In the last 30 years it's gotten about 15 times better. China has greatly benefited from getting rid of communism, and today they trade and they produce more goods and services as any country in the world.